will be 40 seconds.
In the 50s, the Cold War had launched the development of computer technology for combat and missile simulations.
This is part of the military strength of the United States.
As the rehearsal for war intensified, a young physicist working in a nuclear lab forever changed how the world viewed the button. In 1958, William Willie Higginbotham, who had worked on the first atomic bomb, turned two rudimentary lines and a bouncing ball into the first interactive entertainment experience on a computer, Tennis for Two.
Every weekend they would have these contests to see who could come up with the coolest thing. Yeah, Willie Higginbotham came up with this idea that you could take an oscilloscope and make a tennis game out of it.
It was an expression of a kind of rebellious adolescent energy working alongside the military projects, taking this most expensive piece of equipment at the time and repurposing it to play games.
Suddenly, computers had a use beyond military computations. But as the war evolved, so would the games and the players.
Laika, first space traveler, was ready for the takeoff, and here it is.
And I do remember all this noise about the dogs coming in the space. I even remember their names, you know, Belka and Strelka and whatever, you know.
Shortly after Laika's flight, the Russian man-in-space program began. The same centrifuge that tested Laika was now adapted for human experiments.
Definitely Gagarin's flight was a very big deal in 61.
Major Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin was launched into orbit around the Earth.
Yuri Gagarin had taken the first steps into outer space for the USSR, but America wasn't far behind.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The Cold War became a race to space.
On the space age.
And it deeply influenced Steve Russell, an MIT programmer who carried video games into the next realm with his own virtual space war.
Space race was very much in the news. And, you know, spaceships taking off, spaceships blowing up were something that you could hardly escape. And further, I had just read Doc Smith's Lesman series. These are a bunch of science fiction stories where the heroes went zooming across the galaxy, inventing new technology as they went, being pursued by the forces of pure evil.
Before he could battle the forces of pure evil, Steve Slug Russell had to master the hulking PDP-1 campus computer.
This is a PDP-1, the first computer I met, like a modern personal computer. You can turn it on with one switch.
It was considered at the time a microcomputer, meaning it was only the size of a refrigerator.
It cost $120,000, and it did something simple like typing or being a desk calculator. The programs were typically called expensive, so there was expensive typewriter and expensive desk calculator.
It didn't show anything spectacular. It was so unimpressive that they kind of felt like no way, we can do, with this PDP, we can do something way cooler.
Eventually we figured out that, well, you could have two spaceships and they could fire torpedoes at each other. Yeah, okay. That's kind of boring. Can you make something blow up? Yeah.
If Tennis for Two was a light-hearted Cold War distraction, Steve Slug Russell's game was a direct expression of the space race and the global fear of space war.
That was straight out of the times. That was, you know, that was that feeling of the Soviet paranoia, you know, communism's going to kick our ass. I mean, that played right into the collective consciousness of society. It says, we're kind of afraid here, you know, are we going to go to war?
It was truly remarkable and ahead of its time, and it was profoundly influential on me.
I think it was the world's most popular computer game for a couple of years, mostly because it was the only one.
The coding instructions for the game were passed from programmer to programmer, and any institution with a PDP-1 computer inevitably had a version of Space War also.
So it became open source, and we gave copies of the sources to anybody who looked and anyone who wanted them.
These were young guys in their 20s who were part of a group that we think of today as the first generation of hackers.
It wasn't so much rebellion as exploration. You know, there were all these new things to do and see. Sort of joy of a bright, shiny new erector set with lots of different new parts. And you can build things.
One of the things Steve Russell built was the foundation for what would become the most important part of any video game experience, the joystick.
Originally, the controls were just from the console switches. And then some of the Model Railroad Club guys built a control box using surplus telephone parts.
Steve Russell was also the first programmer to put destruction on the screen.
Well, one thing that I sometimes say is, I unleashed the curse of video games upon the world.
With Cold War conflicts in Korea, Berlin, and then Vietnam, the 60s threatened to drag the world into chaos. And television was there to document the drums of war. But there was no way to change what was on the screen.
Our televisions had brought us scenes of such despair. Our televisions had become the site of napalm, of little Vietnamese girls running from bombs. Our televisions were pain machines. And they were pain machines that offered us no way to adjust them.
Many U.S. colleges see the Nixon move as a red flag. They'd been demanding that the U.S. get out of Southeast Asia.
At the time, in the 70s, the television was a very passive or cold medium.
And Nixon seems now to be digging in. It's like putting a match to a giant fuse, zigzagging across the nation.
Television was a static purveyor of bad news that one man and one idea would change forever.
And all of a sudden, a video game turned into a hot medium. You now could control what was on that set.
Ralph Baer, widely considered the Thomas Edison of video games, created the first home console system, the Magnavox Odyssey.
The whole difference between what others did and what I did is that I had the vision that there are 40 million TV sets up there that can't do anything except tune in a local 2 or 3 channels.
The Magnavox company has come up with an electronic game simulator that will transform the family TV set into a playground.
I mean, you just couldn't believe it. I mean, this was, at home, on your TV, video games? This is like crazy world. This isn't the future.
I twiddle it, moves my paddle from left to right.
Even before Baer changed the face of television, he had lived the reality of war. He escaped Nazi Germany with his family before the Holocaust and was later drafted to fight in World War II for the Americans. In what would deeply influence Baer and the history of video games, he found himself transferred to Normandy, France as an interrogator and surrounded by the tools of war.
As it turned out, there were weapons all over the place. They mostly came back from North Africa with the British. Everywhere you looked, you could find weapons. I got wrapped up in the guns. The guns have history. The guns have fascination, they're mechanical things. Come back from the war with 18 tons of small arms, foreign small arms.
But Baer had gained more than a museum collection. To mentally cope with war, he had awakened his innate love for interaction with technology, a skill that would lead him to Sanders Associates in 1958.
At the time, they made electronics for defense. And Ralph Baer was a young engineer working there whose background was in television technology.
Baer was hired to build Cold War military technology, but soon he began working on the brown box, the prototype to the first home gaming console, the Magnavox Odyssey.
We built, we call the all-purpose box.
The box played, 7 different games and allowed us to plug in a bunch of different accessories. And we produced a game that was fascinating, and it survived. And you can still play today and still have fun with nothing but extremely crude symbology on the screen.
You want to score, Bill? Sure. Okay, 1-0.
So we'll play a conservative game. Doggone these switches. Here we go. Now I'm going to do a little English on you. Oops. Damn.